archives of the Ministry of Magic kept their own weather. Down in the lower stacks, where the lamps burned a sallow amber and the dust settled in soft drifts on the spines of disused ledgers, the air held a particular cold. Not the brisk cold of winter outside, but something older. The cold of paper that had not been touched in a century. The cold of forgotten things. Hermione Granger had stayed too late again. She knew it before she felt it. She always knew. There was a small, traitorous tightness that began at the base of her spine on the nights when her body intended to betray her. A coiling sensation, no different from a serpent shifting in sleep. She had learned to read the warning. She had also learned that reading the warning made no difference at all. The ledger on the table before her was a customs manifest from 1743, entirely irrelevant to the case she had been asked to prepare. And she had been staring at the same line of copperplate script for 11 minutes. 2 crates of Egyptian scarab beetles, value undeclared, signed for by Master Cygnus Black. She read it again. She read it a 4th time. Her quill hovered above the parchment, as though the act of holding it upright might tether her to the hour, to the building, to herself. The first wave hit her between her shoulder blades. It was not the pain she had grown almost familiar with. That was a dull throb, a guest she had learned to entertain. This was the other kind, the kind that arrived like an uninvited hand. There are wounds no wand can reach. Some live in the bone, some live in the silence after. And sometimes the hands that broke you are the only hands steady enough to put you back together, if you let them kneel. This is where our story begins. The archives of the Ministry of Magic kept their own weather. Down in the lower stacks, where the lamps burned a sallow amber and the dust settled in soft drifts on the spines of disused ledgers, the air held a particular cold. Not the brisk cold of winter outside, but something older. The cold of paper that had not been touched in a century. The cold of forgotten things. Hermione Granger had stayed too late again. She knew it before she felt it. She always knew. There was a small, traitorous tightness that began at the base of her spine on the nights when her body intended to betray her. A coiling sensation, no different from a serpent shifting in sleep. She had learned to read the warning. She had also learned that reading the warning made no difference at all. The ledger on the table before her was a customs manifest from 1743, entirely irrelevant to the case she had been asked to prepare. And she had been staring at the same line of copperplate script for 11 minutes. 2 crates of Egyptian scarab beetles, value undeclared, signed for by Master Cygnus Black. She read it again. She read it a 4th time. Her quill hovered above the parchment, as though the act of holding it upright might tether her to the hour, to the building, to herself. The first wave hit her between her shoulder blades. It was not the pain she had grown almost familiar with. That was a dull throb, a guest she had learned to entertain. This was the other kind, the kind that arrived like an uninvited hand, reaching through her ribs and twisting. She set the quill down because her fingers were no longer interested in obeying her. She placed both palms flat against the wood of the table. She told herself, very calmly, the way she had been taught to tell herself, that this would pass in 90 seconds. It always passed. She had only to outlast it. The second wave was not as patient. Her knees gave first. She felt the table edge bite into her hip bone as she went down, and she remembered, distantly, that she had once been a girl who knew 6 different defensive charms by the age of 12, and that none of those charms had any application here. Her own muscles were the curse now. There was nothing to deflect. There was only her body, which had been written upon 18 months ago in a drawing room with a marble floor, and which had been rewriting itself ever since in a language she could not translate. She did not scream. She had trained herself not to scream. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron, and she folded forward into the dust between 2 shelves, and she waited. She did not hear him approach. He was very quiet, always, in the way certain animals are quiet. Not from stealth, but from a habit of moving through rooms where being noticed had once been dangerous. What she heard was the soft displacement of air as someone knelt beside her, and a voice she had not heard speak her name in years, saying nothing at all. Draco Malfoy did not touch her. He did not ask if she was all right, which was the question she had come to despise above all others. He set down whatever he had been carrying, a folder, she thought, by the soft slap of leather, and he simply lowered himself onto one knee in the narrow aisle and waited, the way one waits beside a wounded creature one has no right to startle. She kept her eyes shut. Her forehead was pressed against the cold stone of the floor. She could smell the old paper, and beneath it the faint, clean scent of him. Something like cedar, something like cold water. Not the cologne she remembered from school. Something more austere. Something a man might wear who had decided to take up no more space in the world than was strictly necessary. A full minute passed. The cramp eased its grip a fraction. She drew a shuddering breath. "Don't," she said, before he could speak. Her voice came out as gravel. "I wasn't going to." It was the first thing he had said to her since the trials. His voice was lower than she remembered, roughened, perhaps, by the same long quiet that had altered her own. "I don't need... I know." She opened her eyes then. He was looking at the spine of the shelf opposite him, deliberately not at her, and his hands were resting open on his thighs, palms up, fingers loose. She understood the posture without having to interpret it. He was showing her that he held nothing, that he intended nothing, that he would remain there, kneeling on a dirty stone floor in the ministry sub-basement, for as long as it took her to be able to stand again, and that he would not require her to acknowledge it afterwards. It was the most considerate thing anyone had done for her in 11 months. It infuriated her. "Go away, Malfoy. In a moment." He still did not look at her. "When you can sit up." "I can sit up now." "Then please do." She tried. Her arm trembled beneath her weight and folded. She lowered herself back to the floor with as much dignity as a person can muster in such a position, which is to say, none. And she pressed her cheek against the stone and closed her eyes again, and to her absolute horror, she felt the hot, ridiculous press of tears at the corners of her lashes. He did not move. He did not speak. He waited. Eventually, she did not know how long, only that the lamps had guttered low and the cramp had retreated into its usual sullen hum. She pushed herself upright. He rose at the same moment, neither helping her nor hovering, and stepped back to give her the dignity of the space. She brushed dust from her robes with hands that had not yet stopped shaking, and she did not look at him. "Thank you," she said, because she had been raised by people who had taught her to say thank you, and because she could not bear the alternative, which was silence. He inclined his head a fraction. He picked up the folder he had set down. He said, "Good night, Granger," and he walked away down the aisle, and she stood very still in the dim amber light and listened to the sound of his footsteps receding through the stacks until the heavy door at the far end opened and closed, and she was alone again with the dust and the manifests and the ruins of her own body. She did not cry until she got home. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. She knew it was from him before she opened it. The parchment was heavier than what she received from the ministry, the colour of bone, and the wax seal bore no crest, only a single pressed initial, small and unassuming. She held it for a long moment at her kitchen table before she broke it. The note inside was 4 lines long. Granger. There is an old method of healing in my family's records. It predates wand work. It is not pleasant, and it requires a great deal of trust, which I do not expect you to have. I can try, if you let me. The choice is entirely yours, and there is no consequence to refusing. D.M. She read it 3 times. Then she set it down on the table and walked into her sitting room and sat very still in the armchair by the window for what might have been an hour and might have been 4. The light moved across the floor. The kettle she had set to boil grew cold. A pigeon landed on the sill, considered her through the glass, and flew away. An old method. She knew what that meant in a family like his. It meant something that had not been written into any modern textbook. It meant something the ministry would not approve of, and the healers at St. Mungo's would not have heard of. It meant, possibly, something that worked, in the way that very old magic sometimes worked when newer magic had given up. She thought of the night before, when she had woken at 3 in the morning, with both calves locked in a spasm so violent she had bitten through the leather strip she kept by her bed. She thought of the bottle of nerve tonic on her nightstand, which she had been ordered to taper from, but could not, because tapering meant nights like that one, only worse. She thought of the healer who had told her last month, with the kind of compassion that is itself a wound, that she should consider what quality of life meant to her now and adjust her expectations accordingly. She thought of his hands resting open on his thighs in the dust. She wrote back that evening, 1 line, where and when. His reply came the next morning by the same owl, an address she did not recognize, not the manor itself, she noted, but a separate cottage in the East Gardens, and a date, 11 days hence. A short list of instructions. Wear what you would wear to sleep, or something easy to move in. Eat lightly beforehand. The first session will last 1 hour and will not exceed it. And then, beneath the practical lines, a final sentence in slightly smaller hand, as though he had hesitated before adding it. You may end it at any moment for any reason and never explain. I want you to understand that before you come. She folded the letter into precise quarters and placed it in the drawer where she kept the things she could not throw away but could not bear to look at. Her parents restored photographs, the small carved owl Ron had given her the Christmas before everything ended, a program from a concert she had attended alone in a Muggle city the week she had stopped being engaged. She did not sleep well in the 11 days that followed. But she did not sleep well in any 11 days that followed any others. So it could not be said precisely that he was the cause. On the morning of the appointed day, she stood in front of her wardrobe for a long time. She chose a soft grey shift she sometimes slept in, and a cardigan over it, and woolen stockings because she could not bear the thought of her bare feet on a strange floor, and she pinned her hair back because she did not want it touching her neck. She looked at herself in the mirror, and she saw a woman who had been ill for a long time, pretending for 1 hour that she might be something else. She apparated to the gate at the appointed time. The east gardens of the manor were not what she had braced for. They were not the manicured terror of the main grounds. They were old and a little wild, the hedges grown shaggy at the edges, frost still clinging to the box leaves in the shadowed places. A gravel path curved away through a stand of bare birches, and at the end of it stood a small stone cottage with a slate roof and a single chimney pluming softly into the grey winter sky. He was waiting in the doorway. He wore plain dark robes, no jewellery except a silver band on his smallest finger she did not remember from school. He did not smile. He did not extend his hand. He inclined his head, the same small formal gesture as in the archives, and he stepped aside to let her pass. The room within was warmer than she had expected, and emptier. A low fire burned in a grate of pale stone. There was a long padded table at the centre of the room, draped in a sheet of unbleached linen, and beside it a small wooden stand on which had been set a folded blanket, a glass of water, and a single white candle that had not yet been lit. The walls were bare. The windows had been shuttered. There were no chairs. She stood in the doorway, and her hands found the cuffs of her cardigan, and began, without her permission, to straighten them. "You can still leave," he said quietly behind her. "The door is at your back." She did not turn. "Tell me what happens," she said. Her voice was steadier than she had expected. "Exactly. All of it. Before I lie down on that table, I want to know." There was a pause. She heard the soft sound of him closing the door. "Of course," he said. "Sit, if you'd like. I'll explain everything." But she did not sit. She remained standing in the centre of the bare room, her back to him, her fingers gripping the cuffs of her cardigan as though they were the only things in the world keeping her upright, and she waited for him to begin. He did not move from the door. She could hear him there, the soft sound of his breathing, measured, and the faint creak of leather as he shifted his weight. He was, she understood without turning, waiting for her to choose where in the room she wished him to stand. "Begin," she said. "The ritual is called Sanctum Corporis," he said. His voice was pitched low, the way one might speak to a horse that had not yet decided whether to bolt. "It is a healing method that predates the wand by perhaps 2,000 years. The Malfoys did not invent it. We preserved it. There is a difference, though I doubt the difference matters to you." "Go on." "It works on the principle that certain injuries, particularly those caused by sustained magical violence, embed themselves not in the tissue, but in the body's memory of being touched. The Cruciatus is the cleanest example. It does not damage the nerves themselves. It teaches them to expect harm. Over time, the body forgets that touch can be anything else." She closed her eyes. She had not heard anyone describe it this way before. The healers spoke of neural pathways and residual magical resonance. They did not speak of the body forgetting. And the ritual reminds it. She waited. For 1 hour, he said. I will place my hands on you, slowly, in a specific sequence, beginning above the cloth, beginning at a distance. The early sessions are almost entirely without contact. I will hold my palms a hand's breadth above your skin, and your body will register the warmth and decide, on its own time, whether it wishes to permit closer presence. I will not move faster than your body allows. I will not speak during the session. You may speak if you wish, though most who undergo this find they do not. And if She stopped, started again. If something ceases, during, then I will lift my hands and step back, and we will wait until it passes, and we will continue or we will stop, as you decide. She nodded once. Her fingers were still gripping the cuffs of her cardigan. She forced them, one finger at a time, to let go. There are rules, he said. Tell me. You may end any session with a single word or a single gesture, or by simply standing up. You do not owe me an explanation, then or ever. I will not touch your face. I will not touch your hands unless you place them where I can. I will not look at your face during the work unless you direct me to. If at any point you wish to put on a blindfold of your own choosing, I will provide one. If at any point you wish me to be blindfolded, I will permit it. He paused. And one more. She turned her head a fraction, not enough to see him, enough to listen better. What happens in this room does not exist outside this room, he said. I will not greet you in the ministry corridors. I will not write to you about it. I will not speak of it to anyone, including my mother, who knows I am undertaking it, but will not be told its progress. If you pass me in the street, I will not know you. You may treat me as you have always treated me. The work and the world are kept separate. That is not my preference. It is the protection the ritual requires, and that I require for you. She turned around then. He was standing with his back to the closed door, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He did not look like the boy she had known. The angles of his face had sharpened in the years between them, and there was something in the set of his shoulders. Not weariness exactly, but a kind of stillness that weariness leaves behind once it has finished with a person and moved on. His eyes were on the floor between them. Why? She said. He did not answer at once. She watched the small motion of his throat as he swallowed. Because I can, he said finally, and because no one else has been able to. It was not the answer she had braced for. There was no flourish in it, no apology dressed as offering. He had not said, because I owe you, though she suspected he believed it. He had not said, because I am sorry, though she suspected that too. He had said only, because I can, as though the offering were a fact about the world, no more elaborate than the weather. Lie down, she said. On the table. Show me where you'll be. He looked up at her then for the first time, briefly, and she saw something pass across his face, a small flinch of surprise. And then it was gone, smoothed under, and he nodded. As you like. He crossed to the table and lay down upon it, on his back, his arms straight at his sides, his head turned slightly so as not to look directly at the ceiling above him. He did this without hesitation and without performance. He simply demonstrated the position she would be required to assume, in the place she would be required to assume it, so that she would not have to imagine it alone. She watched him for perhaps 15 seconds. Then she said, "All right." He rose. He did not brush at his robes. He stepped well back from the table, 3 full paces, and gestured to the linen with the open palm of one hand, the way one might gesture toward a seat one had pulled out for a guest. She took off her cardigan first. She folded it slowly and set it on the wooden stand. She kept the grey shift on. She kept the stockings on. She stepped out of her shoes and placed them neatly beneath the stand. And she walked to the table, and she sat on its edge for a moment. And then she lay down upon her back as he had done, and she folded her arms across her ribs, because she did not know what else to do with them, and she stared up at the dark beams of the cottage ceiling, and she waited. The room was very quiet. She could hear the soft pop of resin in the fire. She could hear, somewhere outside, the dry rustle of the birches in a thin wind. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, much too fast. He approached slowly. She could hear that too, the soft tread of his boots on the stone floor, 3 paces, then 2, then 1. He stopped at the side of the table at the level of her shoulder. He did not sit. He did not lean over her. He stood, and for a long moment he simply stood, and she understood that he was allowing her body to recognize that someone had arrived beside it, and to decide whether that someone was a danger. Her pulse did not slow, but it did not climb further either. She took that as permission on its behalf. "I am going to raise my hand now," he said quietly. "Above your sternum, not touching. Tell me if you wish me to stop." "All right." She did not look. She stared at the beam directly above her, and she felt not warmth exactly, but a difference. A small displacement in the air a few inches above her chest, where something had entered the space that had been empty a moment before. Her body knew it. Her body's reaction was immediate and complete. Every muscle from her jaw to her hips locked. She did not scream. She did not flinch outwardly. But she felt the tears come anyway, sudden and silent, sliding down both sides of her face into her hair, and she could not have explained, under any oath, what they were for. He did not lower his hand. He did not lift it away. He held it exactly where he had said he would, a hand's breadth above her sternum, and he waited. He waited for a long time. She did not count the minutes. She could not have. She only knew that at some point her jaw unclenched, and at some point after that, her shoulders unclenched, and at some point, much later, her hips unclenched, and her body, with no instruction from her, drew a deep breath of its own accord, and on the exhale, she felt the tears stop. Above her, still, his hand, unmoving, unhurried. She thought, "He has not asked me if I'm all right." She thought, "He has not asked me anything." She thought, with a small dim flare of something she could not name, "Thank you." He did not move his hand for the remainder of the hour. She knew the hour was over because she heard, from somewhere on the wooden stand, the soft chime of a small device he must have set there before her arrival. He lowered his hand at the sound, slowly, as though it had been a living thing he was setting down, and stepped back the 3 paces and stood with his hands clasped before him and his eyes on the floor. "That was the session," he said. You may take as long as you like before you rise." She lay still. She felt... What did she feel? She felt as she did after a long bath. Loose, a little ridiculous, embarrassed by her own quietness. She felt, beneath all of it, the absence of the dull, humming pain that had lived in the small of her back for the better part of a year. She did not believe it would stay gone. She believed, for the first time in 11 months, that it could. She sat up. She placed her feet on the cold stone. She put on her stockings. She had not realized she had taken them off. She had not taken them off. Her body had simply forgotten about them, and her shoes and her cardigan. She did not look at him as she crossed to the door. She paused with her hand on the latch. "Same time next week," she said, without turning. "Same time next week." She opened the door. The afternoon had paled toward evening. The birches stood in soft silhouette against a sky the color of pearl. She took one step out into the cold and stopped. She did not know why she stopped. Perhaps because she had not said goodbye. Perhaps because she had not thanked him. Perhaps because there was a small, frightened part of her that did not entirely believe the door would still be there next week if she did not turn around now and confirm that it had not been a dream. She turned. He was still standing where she had left him, hands clasped, eyes on the floor. He had not moved. He looked, in that moment, as though he had not entirely returned from wherever the hour had taken him either. He felt her look. He lifted his eyes. For perhaps 2 seconds, they looked at each other across the empty room. Then she stepped back outside and pulled the door shut between them. And she stood for a long moment in the gravel of the path, with her hand still on the iron ring of the latch, her heart performing some complicated arithmetic she did not yet have the language to read. The week that followed was the strangest of her life, which was a thing she did not say lightly, having lived through several strange years. The strangeness was not in any single moment. It was in the absence of certain familiar things. She woke on Wednesday at her usual hour and lay for a long minute waiting for the cramp in her left calf that always greeted her like a sullen housemate, and the cramp did not come. She rose, suspicious. She made tea. She bent to retrieve a teaspoon she had dropped, a movement that, the week before, would have sent a fork of fire up her spine. And her spine accepted the bend, considered it, and let her up again without complaint. She did not trust it. She walked to work, braced for ambush. She climbed the staircase to her office, one slow step at a time, waiting for her body to remember itself. Her body did not. It carried her, with a mild indifference, all the way to her desk. By Thursday, she had developed a small superstition about not thinking of it, as though acknowledging the reprieve might cause it to be revoked. She drafted a brief on the regulation of Class B portkeys, and she did not think of him. She lunched alone in the courtyard with a book about Etruscan curse-breaking, and she did not think of him. She passed a tall figure in pale grey robes near the lifts on Friday afternoon, and her heart performed an entirely unauthorized small lurch before she identified the figure as the new Undersecretary for Magical Sport, and she did not think of him. By Saturday night, she had thought of nothing else for 4 days. She lay in bed in the dark and replayed it. The dust on the stone floor of the archives, the quiet of his refusal to ask her if she was all right, the way he had lain on the table to show her where she would lie, without flourish, without comment, as though demonstrating the safety of a chair, the exact length of his hand above her sternum, the hour that had passed without language, the way she had not been able to thank him, and the way he had not seemed to require it. She thought about the way he had said, "Because I can." She turned the phrase over and over in the dark like a stone she had picked up from a beach. It was a strange kind of generosity, the kind that did not announce itself as generosity at all. Because I can meant nothing about him. It meant only that the thing was possible, and possibility in his apparent calculation obliged action. She did not know what to do with such a sentence from such a mouth. She slept, eventually. She did not cramp. The second session was on a Tuesday, in a slow grey rain that had begun before dawn, and not yet found a reason to stop. She apparated to the gate in a heavy cloak, and walked the gravel path with her head down, the wet of the air seeping into the wool at her collar. The birches were beaded with it, the cottage chimney still pluming faintly into the low cloud. He opened the door before she knocked. He did not say hello. He inclined his head. The small formal gesture had begun, she noticed, to feel almost reassuring, and stepped aside, and she entered, and he closed the door behind her without speaking. The room was as it had been. The fire had been built up against the wet of the day. The candle on the wooden stand had been replaced. He had laid a folded woolen blanket on the table this time, in addition to the linen sheet, and she understood, without being told, that it was for after. She removed her cloak. She removed her cardigan. She paused this time before lying down. "It worked," she said. She kept her eyes on the linen. "I'm glad. For 4 days. It will not always be 4 days. Sometimes it will be 1. Sometimes it will be 10. The body learns at its own pace." She nodded. She lay down. She folded her arms across her ribs and stared up at the beams and waited for him to begin. He began as he had before, 3 paces away, 1 pace closer, the soft tread of his boots stopping at the level of her shoulder. The same warning, the same raising of the hand above her sternum, the same long, patient, unmoving hold. But this time, perhaps 30 minutes in, he spoke. "I am going to move my hand," he said quietly, "to a hand's breadth above your left shoulder. Tell me if you wish me to stop." "All right." The displacement in the air shifted. A small warmth, not heat exactly, but the awareness of life nearby, settled above her shoulder. She had braced for the locking. The locking did not come. Her shoulder accepted the presence of him without seizing. She did not know why this moved her so much. She did not have time to know. The tears came before she had a chance to argue with them, and they slid sideways into her hair, and she did not make a sound, and he did not acknowledge them, and the warmth above her shoulder did not waver. By the end of the hour, he had moved his hand, in slow, careful migrations, to a position above her left hip, and then above her right hip, and then, in the final 10 minutes, to a position above the inside of her left forearm. She had not given him permission to approach that arm. She had also not refused him. He held the warmth a hand's breadth above the scar, without lowering closer to it. He did not look at the arm. He looked at the floor. He simply allowed the warmth of his palm to rest in the air above the slur Bellatrix Lestrange had carved into her, in his aunt's own hand, in his family's own house, and he did not flinch. The chimes sounded. He lifted his hand. He stepped back the 3 paces. She did not move for a long time. When she finally sat up, she did not put her cardigan back on right away. She sat on the edge of the table with her bare forearms resting on her thighs, the slur facing the firelight, and she looked at it as though she had not looked at it in a long while, which she had not. "Next week," she said. "Next week." She put on the cardigan. She walked to the door. She paused again with her hand on the latch. She did not turn this time. She said to the wood, "Thank you." There was a small silence. "You are welcome." She left. The 3rd week, she came on a Tuesday in fog so thick, the gravel of the path seemed to begin and end within 10 feet of her boots. The cottage emerged out of the white like something dreamt. He opened the door. She entered. This time, before lying down, she removed not only her cardigan, but the grey shift she wore beneath it, leaving herself in a plain cotton slip the colour of weak tea, the slur on her forearm bare to the air, her bare arms cold and prickling. She did this without comment, as he had once lain on the table without comment, and she folded the shift and placed it on the stand, and she lay down on the linen and folded her bare arms across her ribs and waited. She heard him take a breath, not a sharp one, a long one, the breath of a man who had been bracing himself for some weeks and had not, until this moment, allowed himself to draw it. He approached. He did not speak. He raised his hand above her sternum and held it there. The warmth was the same as it had ever been, but the layer of cloth between them was gone, and she felt the difference the way one feels the difference between standing near a fire through a coat and standing near it in shirt sleeves. The warmth was not greater. The intimacy of it was. She did not weep this time. She had wept the first 2 sessions, and her body, it seemed, had decided that 2 was sufficient. He worked slowly. He moved his hand with permissions spoken each time from her sternum to her shoulder to her hip. And then, this was new, he asked in the same low, careful voice whether he might lower his palm to the linen itself, a finger's width above her shoulder, not touching her, but no longer suspended. "Yes," she said. He lowered. She felt the warmth come closer, a small and definite gradient. Her shoulder did not lock. Her shoulder did, however, perform a small involuntary movement of its own, a 0.5 millimeter lift, as though seeking to meet him. She did not know if he saw it. She suspected he did. He did not remark on it. In the last quarter of the hour, he asked quietly whether he might place his palm flat against the linen above her forearm, not touching her skin, but resting on the cloth that lay beside it, near the scar, his hand a quiet weight against the table itself. She said yes. She heard the soft sound of cloth as his palm settled. She turned her head, then, for the first time, to look. He was kneeling beside the table. She had not realized he had knelt. She had not heard him kneel. And his head was bent, his pale hair falling forward across his temple, his hand resting flat on the linen beside her bare arm, his eyes closed. He looked, in that moment, like a man at prayer in a chapel where he was not certain he was welcome. He did not know she was watching. She did not tell him. She looked away again before he could feel her looking. The chimes sounded. He opened his eyes. He lifted his hand. He rose to his feet, slowly, as though he had been kneeling longer than he had, and stepped back the 3 paces. She sat up. She did not reach immediately for the shift. She sat for a moment in the firelight with her bare arms in her lap, and she looked once, very briefly, at him. He was looking at the floor. The line of his jaw was very tight. "You knelt," she said. He didn't answer at once. "Yes," he said. "Why?" A long pause. "The ritual requires it," he said. "Toward the end. When the work approaches the body's most marked places, the practitioner lowers. It is a—" he searched for the word—"a posture of acknowledgement, of the wound, not of the person, of the wound." "Yes." She nodded slowly. She drew on her shift. She drew on her cardigan. She walked to the door. She paused there. "Malfoy." "Yes." "That night, in the archives." She kept her hand on the latch. She kept her eyes on the latch. "Did you know it was me before you came down the aisle, or did you find out when you got there?" The silence was longer this time. "I knew," he said. "How?" "You stay too late on Thursdays. The lamp on your desk burns until 9. I had—" a pause. "Noticed." She did not respond at once. She did not turn around. She said, "Good night, Malfoy," and she opened the door and stepped out into the fog, and she walked the gravel path with her cloak drawn close around her and her face hot in the cold white air. And she did not look back at the cottage, because she could not, just then, bear to know whether he was watching her go. The 4th week, she did not go. She wrote no letter. She sent no owl. She rose on the Tuesday morning at her usual hour, and she dressed for the ministry, and she walked to work in a thin, cold drizzle, and she did not permit herself to think about the cottage, or the cottage's chimney, or the man who would by mid-afternoon be lighting a candle and folding a blanket and laying a sheet of linen for a person who was not coming. She had a reason. She had given herself the reason on Sunday night, lying awake in her bed at 1:30, with a small candle on her nightstand, guttering low, and the room very quiet around her. The reason was this. He had been watching her. He had been noting the hours she kept. He had known when she stayed late, and on which days, and he had come down to the archives that night, not by accident, but on purpose. Whatever the ritual was, it had not begun in the cottage. It had begun before that, in some interior of his that she could not see and had not been invited into. She found that she could not bear the thought of it. Not because it frightened her. She had wished, several times in the last year, that someone in the world would notice the hours she kept. The notice itself was not the trespass. The trespass was that the noticing had come from him, that the eyes which had logged the burning of her desk lamp belonged to a face she had spent years training herself not to see. It made the work in the cottage suddenly mean a different thing. Or rather, it made the work suddenly mean when before it had only worked. She had been able to lie on the table because what happened there had no commentary. He did not speak. He did not look at her face. He did not afterward reference the hour. The silence had been a kind of mercy, a chamber sealed from interpretation, where her body and his hands could conduct their negotiations without her mind being required to participate. And then he had told her, with that small, flat honesty of his, that he had been watching her on Thursdays, and the chamber had cracked, and all the meaning she had been holding back had begun to leak in. So she did not go. She went to work. She drafted a memorandum on the licensing of trans-European broomstick imports. She lunched in the canteen with a colleague from Magical Transportation who talked at length and without prompting about her ferret. She returned to her desk. She watched the clock pass 3. She watched it pass 4. At 4 o'clock precisely, she had a cramp, the first in 12 days, and she went very still in her chair with both hands flat on her desk, and she rode it out without making a sound, and when it passed she found her cheeks were wet, and she thought, yes, good, this is what it is supposed to feel like. She did not go. 3 days passed. No letter came. She had not realized until the absence of the letter how much she had been waiting for it. She did not know what she had wanted it to say. Are you all right? I missed you on Tuesday. Please come next week. Any of these would have been an intrusion, the kind of intrusion she had told herself she did not want from him. None of them came. He was, as he had said he would be, a man who did not exist outside the room. She found herself furious with him for honoring his own terms. She tried not to be furious. She failed. By Friday night, she was pacing her small flat in stockinged feet with a glass of wine she had not touched and a fire she had not properly built, and she was speaking aloud, to no one, sentences such as, "What did you expect? Exactly. And what is the matter with you? And he is doing precisely what he said he would do, you idiot. What more do you want?" She did not know what more she wanted. She knew only that she wanted it badly, and that wanting it from him, of all people, was so absurd a development that she felt, almost, that someone ought to be made aware of it. Some authority, some sensible adult. She had no such person in her life. The friends she had once told everything to had been gently set down on a shelf during the long quiet of her illness, and she had not, in her improving health, yet found the energy to take them up again. Harry was in aura training and very tired. Ginny was in Holyhead and very busy. Ron was, mercifully, very married to a witch who had been kind to her and whom she liked, and whose existence she nonetheless could not bear to be in the same room with for more than 40 minutes at a time. There was no one to tell. There was no one, it turned out, but him. She put down the wine. She put on her boots. She did not put on her cloak, because she did not, in the moment, trust herself to do anything that required 2 consecutive intentions. She apparated to the gate. It was full dark. The East Gardens at night were a different country. The birches black against a sky, pricked with hard winter stars, the gravel pale as bone underfoot, the cottage windows dim but not dark. He had lit a lamp. She walked toward the lamp. She did not knock. She did not have to. He opened the door before she had finished climbing the step. He was in shirt sleeves. The collar was open. His hair was loose at his temple, in the way it had been the first night she had really seen him, in the dust. He looked at her, and his face did the thing she had begun against her will to learn. The small involuntary flinch of surprise, and then the smoothing under, and then the stillness. "You should have a cloak," he said. "Yes." He stepped aside. She entered. He closed the door behind her. She had not rehearsed this. She had not planned it. She stood in the warm, dim room with her hands at her sides, and she said, "Why didn't you write?" His brow drew together, very faintly. "You did not come." "Yes." "I know. I assumed you had reasons." I had a reason. Then I had no business asking after it. "That is the most maddening thing about you," she said, and her voice was not steady, and she did not care that it was not steady. "Do you know that? That you will not ask, you will not pursue. You set out the terms, and then you simply wait, in your own perfect silence, for whatever I decide, and you will not say a single word that could be construed as wanting me to decide one way or the other. Do you understand how infuriating that is?" "I understand that it is the only honest thing I know how to offer you," he said. She stared at him. "Speak plainly," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "You came here once a week," he said, "because you trusted that nothing in this room would ask anything of you. If I had written to you when you did not arrive, I would have been asking something. I do not have the right to ask anything of you, Granger. Not anything. Not even your attendance." "Don't say it like that." "Like what?" Like a man performing his penance in a hair shirt. Don't perform it for me. I cannot stand it." His jaw tightened. He looked away. "It is not a performance." "Then what is it?" "It is what is true. That you have no right to ask anything of me." "Yes." "You have the right to ask whether I am still alive, Malfoy. That much, surely. You have not seen me in 3 weeks. I might have been—" She stopped herself. His eyes came back to her face. They were not cold. They were very, very tired. "I would have known," he said quietly. "If you had not been. I do not know how, but I would have known." The room was very still. The fire popped softly in the grate. She did not know what to do with her hands. She did not know what to do with her face. She looked at him, and she felt, with a clarity that frightened her, that if she stayed in the room for another minute, she would do something she could not undo. And she did not know what the thing was, and she did not trust herself to find out. "I should go," she said. "You should sit down. You're shaking." "I am not. You are. Sit, please." She sat, on the edge of the long padded table, where she had lain 3 times before with her arms folded across her ribs. He did not approach her. He went, instead, to a small cupboard she had not noticed at the back of the room, and took out a green glass bottle and a small cup, and poured a finger of something dark amber into the cup, and crossed the room, and held the cup out to her at arm's length, his eyes on the floor. She took it. Her fingers brushed his. It was the first time he had touched her. It was, technically, an accident. It was a brush of fingertips against fingertips, the kind that happens 100 times in a life when one person passes another a cup. It lasted perhaps 1/3 of a second. She felt it move through her like a small hot wire that ran from the pad of her index finger to the base of her throat, and her whole body, which had been shaking, performed the opposite of locking. It went absolutely, entirely still, the way the world goes still in the half-second before a bell rings. He stepped back the 3 paces. He did not look at her. She drank what was in the cup. She did not taste it. "Why did you watch me on Thursdays?" "I should not have." "That is not an answer." He was silent for a long time. "I was assigned the archives in March," he said at last. "I had not known you worked late there until I saw your lamp burning, the 2nd week I had the post. The first time I saw it, I told myself I would not come down. The 2nd time, I told myself the same. By the 4th Thursday, I had begun instead to listen, from the lift, to see whether the lamp was burning. Why? Because if it was, I knew at least one other person was in the building, and I preferred not to be alone. She looked at him. That is not the reason. He drew a slow breath. No, he said, it is not the reason. She waited. He did not give her the reason. He looked instead at the floor between them, and his hands hung at his sides, and he did not move, and she realized, with a kind of slow inward toppling, that he was not going to give her the reason. Not because he did not know it, because he knew it perfectly well and would not say it, because saying it would constitute asking, and he had decided, somewhere in himself, that asking was a privilege he was not entitled to. She set the cup down on the wooden stand. She stood. I will come on Tuesday, she said. All right. And Malfoy. Yes. If I miss another Tuesday. Her voice almost failed her. She would not let it. Write to me. I am not asking you to ask for anything. I am asking you not to be so terribly good about it. Do you understand? He looked up. He looked at her for a long moment, and his face did something it had not done before. A small, involuntary softening at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, not anything so coherent, but a small breaking of the long, careful stillness he had been holding since she had walked through the door. Yes, he said, I understand. She nodded once. She crossed to the door. She did not pause this time with her hand on the latch. She opened it and walked out into the cold dark of the garden, and she heard him, behind her, close the door very softly, and she walked the gravel path under the hard white stars with her arms wrapped around herself in lieu of the cloak she had forgotten, and she did not, this time, feel cold. Tuesday came in a thin, clean light, the rain having paused for the first time in a fortnight, and the gardens lying drowsy under a wash of pale sun. She walked the gravel path at the appointed hour with her cloak, this time properly fastened at her throat, and her hair pinned back as it had always been. And she did not allow her mind to rehearse what she would say, or what she would do, or what she might want him to do, because she had learned, in the 4 days since their conversation, that rehearsal made matters worse. He opened the door before she knocked. The small inclination of the head, the step aside, the closing of the door behind her with that particular gentleness she had begun to recognize as a thing he did with everything. Books, doors, cups, his own movements within a room, as though he had taken a quiet private vow never to slam, never to clatter, never to disturb the air around him more than was strictly necessary. The room was as it had been, linen on the table, folded blanket, glass of water, white candle. But there was a new thing on the stand, a small clay bowl, shallow and unglazed, with a few drops of pale gold oil pooled in the bottom and a faint, clean scent rising from it. Something like beeswax, something like the inside of a barn in summer, something she did not know the name of. He saw her look. Today, if you choose to permit it, he said, we begin direct contact. It would be useful but not required for me to use a small amount of oil. It allows the hand to move without dragging. If you would rather I work dry, that is entirely fine. If you would rather not work skin to skin at all today, that is also entirely fine. The ritual permits the cloth layer for as long as you wish to keep it. There is no schedule. She looked at the bowl. She looked at him. She looked at the table. "The oil," she said. "All right." He did not move to it. He waited. She removed her cloak. She removed her cardigan. She removed the grey shift, this time without ceremony. She had worn beneath it the same plain cotton slip as before. She folded the shift, placed it on the stand, and stepped out of her stockings as well, a thing she had not done in any previous session, and stood for a moment in the warm, dim room, in nothing but the slip and her bare feet on the cold stone. And she felt every inch of her own skin awake to the air in a way it had not been in some time. She lay down. She did not fold her arms across her ribs this time. She let them rest at her sides, palms up, the way he had once let his rest on his thighs in the dust. She turned her face slightly toward the wall so that she would not be looking at him, and so that he would not feel the need to keep his eyes so insistently on the floor. "Begin," she said. She heard him cross to the stand. She heard the faint sound of his fingertips entering the bowl. She heard him rub his palms together, slowly, the soft, warming friction of skin against skin, and the small, clean scent of the oil bloomed a little brighter in the room. She heard him approach. 3 paces. 2. 1. "I am going to place my hand on your sternum now," he said quietly. "Touching. Tell me if you wish me to stop." "All right." The warmth came nearer and nearer, and then it was no longer warmth, but a weight, a small, deliberate, settled weight, the palm of her hand resting flat against the center of her chest above the cotton, where she could feel the heat of him through the slip as a separate temperature from her own. Her body did not lock. This was the thing she noticed first, with a kind of dim astonishment. Her body, which for 19 months had treated every touch as an arriving enemy, accepted the weight of his palm above her sternum and did not flinch, did not seize, did not so much as catch its breath. It received him the way a stone receives sunlight, without comment, without resistance, simply because it had been warm enough for long enough that warmth had begun to feel like a thing that was permitted. Her eyes filled, very quietly, and emptied, and filled again. He did not move his hand for what must have been several minutes. He allowed her body to register that the warmth was now also a weight, and that the weight was not asking anything of it. Then, with the same slow care he had used for every prior session, he moved. He worked along her sternum first, palm flat, slow as a tide. He moved to her shoulder. He moved to the inside of her upper arm. He worked downward, by inches, with that almost unbearable patience, his hand always warm, always certain, always silent. When he reached the inside of her elbow, he paused, and she understood he was asking, without asking, whether he might continue down to the forearm and to the slur. She turned her face toward him, then, against the rule of the ritual, which forbade him to look at her face unless she initiated. She wanted him to look. She wanted, suddenly and fiercely, to be seen by him while he did this thing. He felt her turn. He raised his eyes. He did not speak. Neither did she. They looked at each other across the foot or two of warm air between them, and his pupils were very large in the dim, and his pale hair had fallen forward across his temple in the way she had begun to think of as his, and his mouth was slightly parted, and she understood, with the slow inward toppling she had begun to recognize as her dominant interior weather, that he had been holding his breath. She nodded, very slightly. "Go on," He bent his head again. He lowered his hand to her forearm. He did not flinch as his palm settled over the scar. He did not look at the scar. He worked over it as he had worked over every other part of her, slowly, with oil, with the same flat, certain pressure. And she watched the top of his head, the line of his cheekbone, the small muscle that flickered at his jaw. And she did not weep this time, because weeping seemed inadequate to what was being undone in her. She felt the slur for the first time in 19 months, not as a wound, but as a place on her arm, a piece of geography, not a name, not an accusation, a piece of her own body, which a man with very steady hands was patiently teaching her she was allowed to occupy. He worked the forearm, the wrist, the back of the hand. He paused with her hand in his, palm down, his thumb resting at the small bone of her wrist, and she understood it as a kind of question. She turned her hand over within his, so her palm faced his, and she let her fingers rest open in the cup of his hand. He went still. She felt him go still all the way to his shoulders. He did not close his hand around hers. He did not stroke. He simply held the cup of his palm beneath her open palm, the way one might hold a small living thing one did not wish to startle. And after a long moment, she felt the faintest tremor pass through his fingers, a small, involuntary motion he did not have time to suppress. It was the first time she'd seen him not entirely in control of himself. The hour was almost done. She did not know how she knew. She knew. The chime would sound any moment. She withdrew her hand from his, slowly, so he would not feel it as a rejection, and laid it back at her side, palm up, and turned her face once more toward the wall. He stepped back, the 3 paces, the hands clasped before him. The chimes sounded. He did not move. She did not move. The chime, she realized with a small distant clarity, had sounded perhaps a full minute ago. Neither of them had marked it. The hour was over. The hour was over by some indeterminate margin. He was standing 3 paces from the table, with his hands clasped before him and his eyes on the floor. And he was not moving, because he had not yet permitted himself to move. She sat up. She did not reach immediately for the slip strap, which had slipped a little from her shoulder. She sat on the edge of the table in the firelight, with her bare feet brushing the cold stone, and she looked at him, and she said, quietly, "Malfoy." "Yes." "Look at me." He looked up. He had not, she realized, looked at her face since the small permission she had given him during the work. His eyes met hers now, and they were not the eyes of a man performing a ritual. They were the eyes of a man who had been touching her body for the better part of an hour with his entire self, channeled into the discipline of not feeling, and who had reached the end of the discipline, and who did not, at this moment, know what to do with what was left of him. She did not know what to do either. She did not know it. She felt it, though, very precisely. She felt it in the way her breath would not come quite evenly. She felt it in the small heat at the base of her throat. She felt it in the way she had not yet adjusted the strap of her slip and was not, in any hurry, going to. She did not know how long they looked at each other. It was she who broke it in the end. She broke it by saying, in a voice she barely recognized as her own, "This is no longer healing." "I know. Is it still permitted?" He drew a very long breath. "The ritual permits whatever passes between 2 people who have entered it," he said carefully. "It does not prescribe what may grow between them. It is older than such prescriptions. But I will not, Granger. I will not let it become what it should not be while you are still in need of what it was. Do you understand? I think so. When you no longer need this room, he said, we will know. And then, whatever is to be said between us will be said outside it. She nodded. She drew the strap of the slip back up onto her shoulder, slowly, with deliberate care. She rose. She put on her stockings and her shift and her cardigan. She walked to the door. She paused. She turned. He was still standing where he had been, 3 paces from the table, hands clasped, eyes now on her. He had not gone back to the floor with them. Next Tuesday, she said. Next Tuesday. She crossed the room. She did not know why she crossed the room. She crossed it because her feet, which she had recently regained the use of, were carrying her without consultation, and she stopped a hand's breadth in front of him, close enough to feel the heat of him through her cardigan, close enough to smell the faint, clean ozone of him under the beeswax of the oil. And she rose, very slightly, onto the balls of her feet, and she pressed her lips, once, to the corner of his jaw, just below his ear, the way one presses a seal to wax, and she lowered herself again and stepped back. He had not moved. He had not breathed. "Good night, Malfoy," she said. She walked to the door. She opened it. She stepped out into the pale afternoon sun, and she pulled the door shut behind her with the same gentle care he used, and she walked the gravel path with her hands pressed flat against the wool of her cardigan over her sternum, where the warmth of his palms still lived. And she did not, this time, turn to see whether he was watching her go. She did not need to. She knew. The week that followed was the week the storms came. They came up from the west, one after another, in a long grey procession off the Irish Sea, and they settled over the south of England with the slow, patient malice of guests who have been invited to stay and have decided to test the limits of the invitation. The ministry windows ran with water from Monday to Monday. The lifts smelled of wet wool. The newspapers ran daily warnings about the wards on the older country properties, which had not been built in the 17th century with this particular kind of weather in mind. She thought about the cottage. She thought about the wards on it, which she had felt as a faint, silvery pressure against her skin each time she had crossed them at the gate. She thought about the chimney and the slate roof and the leaded glass in the small shuttered windows, and she thought, without permission from herself, about him alone in it on the long wet nights between Tuesdays, lighting his lamp, listening to the rain. She did not write to him. He did not write to her. The terms were the terms. She slept, however, badly. Not from pain. The pain had not returned since the 3rd session, and she had begun to understand it now as something genuinely gone, not merely paused, but from a low, restless heat under her sternum that had taken up the bed space the pain had vacated, and that did not, like the pain, respond to nerve tonic, or to a hot bath, or to a glass of wine. She lay in the dark, and she thought about his hand opening beneath hers on the table. She thought about the tremor she had felt pass through his fingers. She thought about the corner of his jaw beneath her mouth, and the soft, sharp rasp of a day's growth she had not registered at the time, but had been replaying since in increasingly elaborate detail. She thought, I have lost my mind. She thought, no, I have only recovered it after a long absence, and this is what minds do when they have been gone for a while and have come home, and I had forgotten. She thought, Tuesday. Tuesday brought the worst of the storms. The wind began before dawn, and by midday the sky over London was the colour of old slate, and the rain was coming sideways in long silver sheets that turned the streets into rivers. The ministry sent half the staff home at 3. She left at past. She did not go home. She apparated to the gate at the appointed hour, and the wind nearly took her off her feet as she landed, and her cloak was sodden through within seconds of her stepping onto the gravel path. The east gardens were unrecognisable. The birches were thrashing. The hedges were laid flat. The gravel ran with brown water. The cottage chimney was streaming smoke sideways into the rain like a torn banner, and the lamp in the window was lit, and she walked toward it with her head down and one arm raised against the wind, and she pounded on the door because the wind would not let any softer sound through. He opened it. He had heard her at the gate. Inside, inside. He pulled her in by the elbow, the first time he had ever taken hold of her, and he did it without thinking, the way one pulls a child out of the road. And he leaned his weight against the door to close it against the wind, and the door closed with a sound like a struck drum, and the sudden absence of the storm in her ears was so complete that for a moment she did not understand she had gone deaf. She was shaking, from the cold, from the wet, from the wind, from the simple fact of his hand at her elbow, which he had not yet released. He released it. He stepped back. He looked at her, properly, fully, his eyes on her face without apology. And he said, "You should not have come. You did not write to tell me not to. I did not think you would. Then you do not know me very well, Malfoy." He almost smiled. It was the closest she had seen him come, and it was gone before it was anything, but she had seen it, and she filed it carefully away. "Get out of that cloak! You're soaked!" She fumbled at the clasp. Her fingers were too cold to manage it. He saw, and he reached, with that same unthinking quickness, to help, and then stopped himself, his hand suspended a half-inch from her throat, and he drew it back. "May I?" "Yes." He undid the clasp. His knuckles brushed the underside of her jaw, not on purpose, simply the geometry of the task, and she felt the small hot wire run from her jaw to her sternum, the way it had run from her fingertip to her throat the night of the cup, and she did not, this time, mistake it for anything else. He took the cloak. He hung it on a peg by the door, where it began at once to drip onto the stone floor in slow, heavy rhythm. "Come to the fire." She went to the fire. He went to a chest at the back of the room. She had not, in 5 visits, registered the chest, and drew from it a long woolen wrap of soft undyed cream, and brought it to her and held it out at arm's length, his eyes on the floor again, as he had taught himself to do. She took it. She wrapped herself in it. It smelled, very faintly, of cedar, of him. "I had intended," he said, "to suggest we postpone the session. The wards are unstable in this kind of weather. The cottage is built old. It will hold. But the ritual requires a steady ambient magic, and there is not, tonight, a steady ambient anything within 10 miles of here. All right? You can flew back from the hearth. I will not. I am not going back out in that." He paused. He looked at her. "No," he said. "Of course not." A silence. Outside, the wind found a loose shutter somewhere and worried at it in long, irregular bursts. The fire popped. The lamp on the stand burned steadily, its small flame upright in the still air of the room. "Sit down, Malfoy." Sit down. I am not lying on that table tonight. I am sitting by your fire because there is a hurricane outside, and you live in a stone cottage in the middle of a wood. And I would like, for 1 hour, to be in a room with another person and not be required to do anything in particular about it. Will you permit that?" He looked at her for a long moment. He drew a low wooden stool from beside the hearth. There was, evidently, more furniture in this cottage than the table had let her see, and he set it perhaps 4 feet from the chair he had now produced from somewhere for her, and he sat upon it, not relaxed. He did not, she suspected, know how to be relaxed. But he sat. She sat in the chair. She drew the wrap tighter around her. She held her hands out to the fire. They sat in silence for what might have been 5 minutes and might have been 20. The wind worried the shutter. The fire ate slowly through a piece of birch. She felt her hair beginning to dry in long, damp curls at her temples, and she did not push them back, because pushing them back would have required attention. She did not, at the moment, wish to spend on her own appearance. "Tell me something," she said finally. "What?" "Anything. Anything at all. I have not heard you speak about anything that was not a ritual or a refusal in 5 weeks. I should like to hear you say something that has no rules attached to it." He thought for a long moment. "My mother grows tea roses," he said. She turned her head to look at him. "Tea roses. In the south wall garden. 12 varieties. She has done it for 30 years. The gardeners are not permitted to touch them. She prunes them herself in the 2nd week of February in a pair of leather gloves she has had since before I was born. Last winter, she let me help. I was surprised that she let me. I was more surprised that I was good at it. You are good at it. At pruning roses. Yes." A small pause. "It turns out one needs to be patient and unsentimental and willing to remove a great many things that look as though they ought to be kept. I had not realized I had any of those qualities until I held the shears." She watched the firelight move on his face. "That is a thing you have said with no rules attached," she said quietly. "Yes." "Thank you." He inclined his head. They sat in silence again. She was no longer cold. The wrap was warm. The fire was warm. The small warmth of him at 4 feet's distance was, she realized with a kind of slow inward astonishment, also warm. A temperature she could feel against the right side of her body, like sitting near a banked stove. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "At the trial, you did not say my name. When they asked who had been brought to the manor, you did not say it. Harry told me afterwards. He said you had been asked directly, and you had refused to confirm. He said the Wizengamot took it as obstruction. I always wondered why." He was silent for a long time. "I did not want it written down in that chamber, in that ledger, in those mouths," he said finally. "I did not want your name to be a thing those men held in their teeth while they decided what to do with me. It was the only thing I could think of that I might still keep out of their reach. So I kept it." She did not speak. She did not, for a long moment, trust herself to. She rose. She crossed the small distance between her chair and his stool. She did not sit. She stood in front of him, the wrap pulled around her, her bare feet on the warm stone near the hearth, and she looked down at him where he sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose between them and his eyes, for once, on hers. She lifted one hand from the wrap. She set it very gently against the side of his face. He closed his eyes. He did not lean into her palm. He did not press his cheek to her hand. He simply allowed himself to be touched, the way she had allowed herself all these weeks to be touched by him, without claiming it, without performing gratitude, without pretending it did not move him. She felt the small rough scrape of stubble at his jaw beneath her fingers. She felt the warmth of his skin. She felt a faint pulse at his temple, very fast. The wind hit the shutter again, hard. The lamp on the stand guttered. He opened his eyes. He did not look at her mouth. He looked at her eyes. He looked at her eyes the way she imagined he had once looked, as a boy, at things he had been told he must not have, and had decided in private to want anyway. "Granger," he said, very low. "Yes, I am not going to do anything tonight. Do you understand?" "Yes. Not because I do not. I understand. I am not asking you to." "All right. But I am not moving my hand either." He let out a soft breath that was almost a laugh. "All right," he said. She did not move her hand. He did not move his head. The storm went on outside. The fire ate its way down the birch log. The lamp burned steady in the still air. And in the small warm room, on a stool drawn up to a hearth, two people sat in a silence that had stopped being the silence of the ritual and become, instead, the silence of two people who had decided, without saying so, that they had time. The shutter banged once more and held. She did not know, afterward, how long she had stood with her hand against his face. She knew only that at some point the wind had begun to soften, and the shutter had stopped its irregular complaint, and the fire had burned low enough that the cottage had grown dim around them. And at some point in all of that, her hand had grown tired, and she had lowered it, slowly, and she had stepped back. He had risen. He had built up the fire without speaking. He had drawn the second chair to the hearth and sat in it himself this time, and they had sat together in the firelight, 4 feet apart, and they had not spoken further about anything that required rules. He had told her, eventually, about a book he was reading, a thin French monograph on the magical metallurgy of pre-Christian Gaul, and she had told him, eventually, about the case she was preparing on the regulation of cross-border portkeys, and they had argued, mildly and without heat, about whether a 1782 treaty still held in light of the 1923 amendments. And somewhere in the argument she had begun to laugh. Not loudly, only a small surprised laugh at something he had said with a perfectly straight face. And he had looked at her across the firelight as though she had performed a small miracle, and he had not said anything about it, but his face had done the almost smile again, and held it a little longer this time. She had flewed home near midnight. The storm had passed. The streets of her neighborhood ran with water, but the sky had begun to clear. She had stood in her own dark sitting room for a long moment, with her hand still smelling, faintly, of cedar from the wrap, and she had not lit a lamp, and she had gone to bed in the dark, and she had slept. She slept well. She slept all the way through. She slept through the next night And the night after that, and the night after that. She did not cramp. She did not wake. She did not need the leather strip. She did not need the nerve tonic. Her body, which had been at war with itself for 19 months, was at peace. She lay in her bed on the 8th morning of unbroken sleep, in the pale grey light of an early winter dawn, and she did the arithmetic. 5 sessions on the table, 1 night by the hearth. 6 weeks since she had felt the curse move in her. 3 weeks since she had felt anything she could honestly call pain. She was, though she had not yet let herself form the word, well. The word, when she let herself form it, made her sit up in bed, because the word came with a second word, attached to it the way a shadow is attached to a shape. Done. She was well. The work was done. She did not move for a long time. She watched the light strengthen on the floor of her bedroom. She watched the small motes of dust moving in it. She did not yet think about what it meant. She allowed herself, instead, simply to register that something had ended, and that she was the one in the world responsible for naming the ending, because he had told her 6 weeks ago in the bare cottage room that he would not. When you no longer need this room, we will know. He had said it as a promise. He had also said it as a kind of fence, on the other side of which lay everything that might be said outside. She had to walk out of the room to get there. She got up. She dressed slowly. She drank her tea standing at the window with her forehead against the cold glass. She did not go to the ministry. She wrote a brief note pleading a domestic matter and dispatched her owl. She sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours with a sheet of parchment and a quill, and she wrote 4 words and crossed them out, and wrote 3 more and crossed those out also. And finally, she wrote, "I think I am well. I should like to speak with you about it on Tuesday, if you will permit me to come a final time. H." She sent it before she could revise it again. His reply came within the hour. 1 line. Tuesday, the usual hour. D. The usual hour on the appointed Tuesday found her at the cottage door in a clear, cold afternoon, with no wind in the birches and a sky the colour of washed linen. He opened the door, the small inclination of the head, the step aside. The room was as it had always been, and not as it had always been. He had not laid out the linen sheet. He had not laid out the blanket. He had not lit the candle on the stand. The clay bowl of oil was absent. The wooden stand itself had been moved to the wall. The long padded table sat in the centre of the room undressed, plain as a piece of furniture in a furniture maker's window, and the chairs from the hearth had been drawn out to face each other in the middle of the room with perhaps 3 feet between them. He had known then. He had known from her letter what she had come to say, and he had prepared the room not for a session, but for a conversation, and he had not pretended otherwise. She felt, looking at the 2 chairs, a small grief she had not anticipated. "Sit, please," he said. She sat. He sat opposite her. He did not clasp his hands. He rested them, palms down on his thighs, in the same posture he had taken on the floor of the archives the first night. And she understood. She was beginning to understand his vocabulary, that he was showing her again that he held nothing. "I am well," she said. "Yes, I thought so. From your letter. 8 nights without waking. No pain in over 3 weeks. The cramps are gone. They are entirely gone, Malfoy. I had forgotten what it felt like, simply to... She stopped. She did not need to finish. He nodded. I am glad. I do not know whether they will stay gone. They may not. The body can relapse. If it does, the ritual can be resumed. But the resumption, in cases I have read, is shorter than the original. The body remembers once it has been taught. So, if they come back, you write to me, and we begin again, for as long as you require. She nodded slowly. There was a silence. Outside, a single bird was singing. A thin, clear winter song, 2 notes repeated. She listened to it for a moment. He waited. The ritual is finished, she said. Yes. You said 6 weeks ago that when it was finished, what was to be said between us would be said outside it. Yes. We are still inside it. The room is the room. The table is the table. We have not yet left. A small pause. Would you like to leave? He said. She thought about it. No, she said. Not yet. I should like to say it here. I should like it to be said in the place it began. Will you permit that? You may say anything you like in this room, Granger. The room is yours. It has been yours since the first session. She drew a long, careful breath. I do not know what to call this, she said. I have tried in the last week to find a word for it. I cannot. Gratitude is not the word. Affection is too small. Love is... She stopped. She did not say the word. She let it sit, unspoken, in the air between them. I do not know what the word is. I know only that I do not wish to leave this cottage today and never set foot in it again. I do not wish to pass you in a corridor at the ministry and have you not know me. I do not wish to spend the rest of my life with a man who was kind to me for 19 weeks and then walked away from me in the perfect silence he believes he owes me. I cannot bear it. Do you understand? He had gone very still in his chair. Yes, he said. His voice was lower than she had heard it. Do you wish to walk away? He looked at her. No? Then say so, plainly, without a rule between us, without a ritual to hide behind. Tell me what you want, Malfoy, in the words you would use if no one in the world had ever told you that you were not entitled to want anything. His jaw worked. He looked for a moment like a man being asked to translate from a language he had not used since childhood. He looked down at his hands on his thighs. He looked back up at her. I want, he said very carefully, to see you on Wednesdays and on Saturdays and on any other days you will permit me. I want to know what you read at night. I want to know what you eat for breakfast. I want to walk into a room and find you in it and not have to pretend I had not been looking for you. I want... His voice almost failed him. He gathered it. I want you to be the person I am allowed to ask after when I have not seen you in 3 days. That is what I want, if you will have it of me. She did not speak at once. She could not. She rose. She crossed the small space between the 2 chairs. She did not stop a hand's breadth in front of him this time. She stopped between his knees, and she set her hands very gently on his shoulders, and she looked down at him in the pale, clear winter light of the bare room. Stand up, she said. He rose. He rose slowly. He was taller than her by half a head, as he had always been, and now there were perhaps 4 inches between them, and she could see the small flutter at the base of his throat, where his pulse was performing its own private storm. You said you would not, that night, by the fire. I said I would not that night, yes. Is tonight a different night? A pause. Yes, he said. Then she said. She did not finish. She did not need to. He raised one hand, slowly, the way he had raised his hand the very first session, with the same careful asking, without asking. And he set it against the side of her face, his palm warm along her cheek, his thumb at her temple. She turned her face very slightly into his hand. She closed her eyes. She felt him bend. She felt the breath of him a half-inch from her mouth, and then a smaller distance than that, and then his lips, soft, careful, perfectly still, against hers. He did not press. He did not move. He simply set his mouth against hers, the way for 19 weeks he had set his palm above her sternum, and he waited there, motionless, to see what her body would do. Her body, which had not flinched from his hand in 3 weeks, did not flinch from his mouth now. Her body did the opposite of flinching. Her body rose, by a small involuntary half-inch, onto the balls of her bare feet, and her hands tightened on his shoulders, and her mouth opened against his, not in any large way, only in the small permission of a breath, and he made, in his throat, the smallest sound she had ever heard a man make, a soft, broken sound that was not quite a word, and his other arm came around her waist, and he gathered her in. He kissed her properly then. He kissed her the way he had touched her, slowly, with attention, as though every separate part of her mouth was a place that required acknowledgement. His hand at her jaw was steady. His arm at her waist was steady. The kiss itself was not steady. The kiss was the place, finally, where his steadiness gave way. And she felt the long, careful discipline of 19 weeks dissolve in him under her mouth. And she was not afraid of what it dissolved into. She had been waiting for it. She had been waiting. She understood now, since the cup, since the tremor in his fingers, since the corner of his jaw beneath her lips in the firelight, since perhaps the very first hour she had lain on his table and felt his hand above her sternum and known, without permitting herself to know what it was she was being given. She drew back only enough to breathe. Their foreheads stayed touching. His hand had not left her face. Malfoy. Yes. Stop calling me Granger. A long pause. She felt him smile against her forehead before she heard it. Hermione, he said. Yes. Hermione. He said it like a man trying out a word he had been forbidden to use, and finding with quiet astonishment that the world had not ended. He kissed her again. They did not leave the cottage that afternoon. They did not leave it in any of the ways one might mean. They left the bare room, eventually. He led her, with her hand in his, through a low door at the back of the cottage she had not in 19 weeks noticed, and into a small kitchen with a copper kettle on a black iron stove, and a window over a stone sink that looked out onto a herb garden gone wild. And he made her tea, slowly, with the same careful attention he had brought to every other thing he had ever done in her presence. And they drank it standing at the window with their shoulders touching, watching a robin work the frost-bitten thyme. They did not speak much. They did not need to. The thing that had passed between them in the bare room had not been an answer exactly. It had been a permission, and what they were doing now in the kitchen in the long, pale afternoon was learning to live inside the permission. He kissed her again, once by the window. He kissed her at her temple, slow as a man learning a road. He set his forehead against the side of her head and breathed. I do not know how to do this, he said quietly. neither do I. I had thought I had disqualified myself from it. Some time ago, I had made a kind of peace with it. You had made a kind of cell with it, Malfoy. There is a difference. He huffed a small breath at the back of her hair, almost laughter. Draco, he said. What? You said to stop calling you Granger. I am asking the same. Draco. Yes. She turned in the small warm space between him and the sink and looked up at him. Draco, she said again, testing it. It is a strange name. Yes, I shall get used to it. Take your time. She smiled. It was the first true smile she had given him since the night in the archives. She felt it move across her face like a thing returning to a country it had been exiled from. She felt him watching it very intently, as though he wished to memorize the route. She did go home, eventually. She went home because she had not eaten, and because she had cats. 2 of them by then. She had become, in the long quiet of her illness, the sort of woman who accumulated cats. And because she had not yet, in the new geography of what was unfolding between them, decided where she wished to wake. He did not ask her to stay. He did not ask her, either, when he would see her next. He had given her a key, a small old iron thing on a length of pale ribbon, and pressed it into her palm at the door and folded her fingers over it, and said only, "When you wish." She wished, as it turned out, frequently. She came on a Thursday after work, with a parcel of supper from a Muggle deli near the ministry, and a thin book of poetry she had decided he must read. She came on a Saturday morning in a fall of soft new snow, and they walked the wild paths of the East Garden for 2 hours, and she found, when they returned, that she had not thought once about her body, which had carried her without complaint up 2 hills and over a stile and back again. She came on a Tuesday evening, the old hour, the ritual hour, and they did not go near the bare room. They sat at the kitchen window and ate bread and butter and oranges, and he read her, in his low, careful voice, a passage from the French monograph on the magical metallurgy of pre-Christian Gaul, and she fell asleep against his shoulder before he was halfway through, and he did not wake her. He carried her, eventually, to the small bedroom at the back of the cottage she had also not, in 19 weeks, noticed, and laid her on the bed with her boots still on, and drew a blanket over her, and lay down on top of the covers beside her, and slept in his clothes, one hand resting open on the pillow between them, not touching her, simply there. She woke once in the night. The cottage was dark. The fire in the kitchen had burned down to its low red whisper. She turned her head on the pillow and looked at him in the dim, and his face in sleep was younger than his face awake. The small permanent tension at the corner of his mouth softened, and she watched him for a long quiet moment, and she thought, I am 20 years old. My body is my own again. There is a man asleep beside me who waited 19 weeks to know my first name. Whatever I am about to become, I am about to become it with him. She slept again. She slept the rest of the night through. The cramps did not return. They did not return that winter or that spring. She would, sometimes, in a moment of small fright, feel a tightness at the base of her spine and stand very still in whatever doorway she happened to be in, and wait, and the tightness would untwist itself, and she would walk on. By summer, she had stopped flinching at her own body's small ordinary motions. By autumn, she had stopped, very nearly, remembering the year before. She did not stop remembering the cottage. She did not need to. She lived there now, more often than she lived at her flat. Her cats had been brought over in 2 indignant baskets and had taken approximately 40 minutes to decide that the cottage, with its sun-warmed kitchen flagstones and its mouse-rich herb garden, was theirs by ancient right. Her books had been shelved alongside his, slowly, over months.
I want to say something before you go. I did not write this story about magic, I wrote it about a body that hurts. Many of us know that body. Maybe it is your body, maybe it was your body once, maybe it belongs to someone you love. When the body hurts for a long time, the worlds get very small. You stop trusting your own skin, you stop trusting touch, you learn to live around the pain like furniture in a small room. I wanted to write about what happened after, not the big healing, not the loud one, the slow one, the quiet one, the kind that happens because somebody sat near you and did not ask you to be okay. Draco does not save Hermione in this story. He cannot. No one can save another person. He only stays. He stays in the room. He keeps his hand open. He waits. And that, I think, is what love really is. Not the kiss. The kiss is easy. The waiting is the love. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying in the room with them. Take care of your body. It has carried you a long way. I will see you in the next story.